forward with truth.
Neutrality in education even possible? What did the Supreme Court actually rule about indoctrination, parental rights, and the nature of RE and worship in our schools in the UK? Has Christian ethos been weakened, or have parental rights been strengthened? And where do we go from here? Welcome to Forward with Truth. I'm Nathan Anderson, your host, and we're joined tonight by a really fantastic panel of four eminent men. So we're here with Jim Allister, MP for North Antrim, Peter Martin, former Education Special Advisor and current MLA for North Down, Steve Beegoo, Head of Education at Christian Concern, and former head teacher, former governor, and lots of other experience in education, and Mark Lambe, current teacher and education campaigner and policy. So with classroom policy experience. So gentlemen, thank you for being with us. And this conversation, I just want to state at the very beginning, is not legal advice. We're discussing a public judgment and its implication, and all views here are the personal remarks of the contributors. So first, we'll start with the legal framework. Okay, so Jim and Pete, we just thank you for coming on. Jim, in clear, straightforward terms, what exactly did the Supreme Court decide about indoctrination, parental rights, and the requirement that RE must be objective, critical, and pluralistic?
Well, I think the first point to be absolutely clear about is that the Supreme Court, for all the voluble things it had to say, did not strike down any of the existing law. It would have had that capacity in terms of what the law currently says. And what the law currently says in Northern Ireland is essentially in respect of religious education found in Article 21 of an order made in 1986. And it does say that religious education is to be non-denominational, but based primarily upon the Holy Scriptures. That's the word, that's the phrase used. Now, the court then, under the influence of a plethora of judgments from the European Court of Human Rights, then expounds at considerable length about what religious education should be, but at no point comes to the stage of saying, in light of all of this, we are striking down Article 21(2) of the 1986 Act. So I think it's very important for educators and school governors and others to recognise and to realise that Article 21(2) remains, and therefore the fundamental foundation is that religious education in the controlled sector can continue to be based upon the Holy Scriptures. Now, politically, if there's any lesson out of this judgment, it is another very good reason why the United Kingdom should leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Because what we have seen is an overlaying of legislative interpretation by the views of expansionist activist judges, primarily in Strasbourg, but here applied by a Supreme Court, which frankly seems to have been captured by metropolitan wokery and deploys all the language of the European Convention's judgments when it talks about indoctrination, which of course is a very pejorative term and a term which I think is intended to and does provoke reaction. Whereas what the law says is that your religious education and your public ceremonies, etc., are entitled to be based and should be based upon the Holy Scriptures. So no school should allow itself to be bullied or intimidated out of departing from what the legislation actually says. And that I think is very important. I think the other surprising thing about the judgment was that it went out of its way to try and demean and diminish the statutory right in that same article for a parent to withdraw themselves to draw the child from the public worship or the teaching of religious instruction, and that's there for any parent to use. And the irony of this case is that a humanist parent, who of course neither believes in God nor religion, who had the option to withdraw their child, suddenly their rights to impose their view upon the greater number in any classroom seems to be elevated. So I think it is important going forward that the Department of Education underscore the significance, relevance, and usability of the withdrawal capacity that's in the education order, and should not allow it to be diminished in the way in which the court was attempting to do. And again, I make the point, for all that it said, the court at no stage struck down any of the legislation. If it really believed that this was contrary to the overriding requirements of the European Convention, it could have struck down legislation. It didn't do that. So it was prepared to wound, but fearful, but scared to strike in that regard. And I think that is something that we all need to hold on to.
Thank you, Jim. Peter, you were nodding there quite a bit. So, what points do you agree with him with Jim on? And does another question is, does the statutory RE framework remain in place?
Okay, yeah, I mean, look, Jim's right in his assessment. At any point, the JR87 could have changed Article 21, which Jim refers to. It comes from the 1986 Education Order. It didn't do that, but it could have. So actually, a lot of the fears, I guess, that parents or teachers or boards of governors initially had, because at the outset, the humanists and secularists came on to the media, certainly sympathetic media shows, and said this is incredible. With reflection, and when I read the judgment, I'm actually more relieved in that there's certainly aspects of the judgment that underpin the 86 order. So, for example, in paragraph 13, it says, historically and today, Christianity is the most important religion in Northern Ireland. It goes on to talk about what's called the margin of appreciation in planning. It's quite an important phrase. That's basically meaning the Department of Education has quite a scope in terms of this when it's writing guidance, which I'm sure it will do. And at paragraph 16, it says that there's no challenge to collective worship. And Jim read out the relevant section of the 86 order, which is 21, that actually undenominational is the phrase that's used. Teaching around the Holy Scriptures can continue. So I guess what happens next is that the department will issue guidance. The minister, my colleague Paul Gibbon, was in the assembly yesterday answering some questions around this. He will issue some guidance, some short guidance quickly, and then a more lengthy piece of guidance, having taken legal advice around it. But he was pretty clear. I asked him a question around Christian ethos in schools. He was pretty clear that he's going to ensure that the Christian ethos isn't diminished. I think the only point I'd make on top of those is that whilst the actual effectiveness of JR87, I think, is going to be quite limited in terms of doing what some people want to try and do in Northern Ireland, which is take the Christian ethos out of our schools. I think if there's an area of concern for me, it is that clearly I don't think they've given up. Boyd Slater, who represents Northern Ireland Humanists, was on the radio. Can't remember. I think it probably was yesterday, sort of saying, "Well, we'll keep going at this. We'll bring more judgments until we've got what we wanted." That's more or less what he said. So I don't think they've given up. But equally, I think it's useful that we have a minister who has made clear on the floor of the Assembly that he is going to protect Christian ethos, not just of controlled schools, but also maintain schools in Northern Ireland.
And just on that point, I think that part of the danger of this judgment is that the humanist, secularist interests will see it as a launching pad to try and push the boundaries further. And you could anticipate, for example, guidance being challenged and a further very aggressive attempt to ram down our throats the interpretations on religion that, of a pluralist nature that have been placed by the European Court of Human Rights. I think that is the danger area, that it could open up new frontiers for those who are so minded. Because let's be very clear, this isn't just about being offended about your child being thinking that you should maybe give thanks for food. This is a very calculated attempt to try and hollow out a religious education in our system. And I think they will try to use the doors that have been partially opened in this judgment to try and push the issue further.
So how would you, Jim, see the whole issue of the wording was quite interesting, wasn't it? And I think we're all older. The idea of indoctrination was a word that was used. Pluralist, objective. Um, these are sort of critical. These were not the sort of words that were in the original order, are they?
No, I think that's why we must at all times keep bringing the debate back to what the order says. The order talks about religious education, non-denominationally, based upon the Holy Scriptures. Well, if you take the Holy Scriptures, they, in significant measure, talk about spreading the gospel. So, in the words of this judgment, the very essence of Christianity, to an extent, is that pejorative term, indoctrination. It is about going into the whole of the world and preach the gospel. So if that is core and central to the Holy Scriptures, then I would throw back to the court the suggestion that that's indoctrination as they interpret it. Pluralism seems to be almost a new religion, but it cannot be that which hollows out the very thing that the statute says. If someone wants to change the law, then they need to change the law. And it should not be changed by activist judges. And it can only be changed by legislation. And therefore, that's the line we need to hold.
Peter, I'm just going to ask you a wee question because there's going to be people in here from other parts of GB. There's going to be people in from the United States maybe listening in. How is the Northern Ireland system? Because it's a very complex system, isn't it? It's a wee bit different to how these things are set up. Jim was saying there about the order. What is this? Just for to clarify.
Okay, so the order that Jim referred to is the 1986 Education Order. For those of you who are nerds, you can go to. I'm not suggesting Jim's a nerd, by the way. He's scratching his head there.
Many
Sorry.
things.
Many things, but maybe not a nerd. It's section 21. And again, look, the key thing is the law in this. So the law wasn't changed. They did have the opportunity to do damage into it. They chose not to. And so the law still stands. So I had a teacher phone me. I think the judgment was last Wednesday. I mean, I had a principal phone me on Wednesday night, sort of saying, "Is nativity cancelled?" Now, Paul, the education minister, actually made that point in the assembly, and Alliance kind of laughed at him, and he rebuked him and sort of said, "No, it's a serious point." And I was nodding behind him because a principal was so concerned that they contacted me to say, can we do nativity? Um, so that's the law that we're talking about. The judge actually I mean, in terms of the ECHR stuff, when the ECHR was designed by, there's a guy called Sir David, I think Sir David Maxwell Fyfe was one of the keys, British diplomat post-war, and when it was set up for people in Europe to have some rights post World War II. And what we have seen, I mean, I made this comment to somebody recently. It wasn't set up to stop kids in primary school singing "Our God is so good," or children's choruses that we might have sung at school. That was not what the ECHR was set up to do. But what we have seen in the last 20, 25 years is interpretations of ECHR, which I think are very problematic, and I've certainly seen that on Education Committee, where we're sort of battered by these things, and certainly the judge in this case relied heavily on it, and that's problematic. So yeah.
So, Jim, is there political or legal scope to clarify or reinforce the whole issue of the Christian ethos of controlled schools, while respecting parental rights? So are those? I suppose what I'm sort of saying is one of the things that seemed to do was this whole dynamic of parental rights, right? This was a thing that I think all of us around this in this chat would firmly agree with. We believe that the parents should have the right to educate the children in their own philosophy. But you'd sort of said earlier something that was quite interesting and quite profound, in the sense that we have a situation where the parental rights of one child is being used to trump the parental rights of thousands of parents. So tell us your analysis, your legal analysis of where this leaves parental rights.
Well, parental rights are left where they are in the statute. And the statute says in Article 21 of the 86 order that a parent has a right to withdraw their child from the acts of public worship and religious education. I would actually like to see those rights extended to include RSE. They don't presently extend there, because I think that it does dovetail with the right of the parent to have their child educated as they see fit. So I don't think we should give any quarter to a court or to a public commentary which says that those public rights must be diminished, those parental rights must be diminished. I think they are in the statute, and so long as they're in the statute, then they are there to be availed of and not to be swept aside. As I said again, the court had the opportunity to sweep it aside. It chose to not to do that. So in those circumstances, they still exist. But there is this dichotomy where a single parent who takes offence at something, instead of exercising the right that he has, wants to change the entire system, probably against the will of most other parents, so that his worldview can be accommodated to the detriment of others. That's somewhere we cannot go. We have fundamental rights here. We have a fundamental description of what religious education is, and we need to hold to that. I think we should also remind ourselves that there's a raison d'etre for that being in our law, and it goes back to where our schools came from. Let's not forget, at the foundation of the state, the churches gave over their schools to the state, and in giving them over, there were deeds of transfer which seem to have preserved the right to have religious education. So it's not something that can be just readily swept aside. And that, I believe, is why it's actually in the 86 order, because that is the historical legacy that came with those schools, and quite right too.
Yeah, it's funny. I think different denominations gave them over at different times. There was one in the 30s, one in the 40s, one in the 50s. This is the Methodist, the Presbyterian, and the Church of Ireland. So when we look at that also adds an extra layer of complexity to the Northern Ireland situation, because you also have the Catholic sector, which is maintained by the Catholic, and then you have an independent, a sort of independent, integrated section. So,
but this judgment's focused on the controlled sector. They are the target of this judgment.
So the main focus really in this is to target the transferred, controlled sector, and I suppose, does that then not leave a real problem then for parents who are from a controlled sector, send their kids to state schools, but with this sense that their school is from a Christian, primarily Protestant ethos. And I think, look, we all know it. I'm sure, Jim, you know people, Peter knows people in there, Mark and Steve will know people who are sending their kids to a primary school in particular, but also secondary schools, which have a peculiar focus and ethos What?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the most disappointing things for me in the reaction to this judgment was the pathetic reaction of the Transferors Council. I thought it was weak, it was inept, and it was inviting further challenge. Instead of standing up for the fact that we are transferors because our churches give over our schools and they give them over on the basis that there would continue to be religious education as defined. I thought the response of the transferors representatives was very weak and out of kilter with transfers that I know in the sector. I chair a board of governors, have done so for many years, and the transfers representatives are very strong in these issues, as you would expect them to be. But the leadership of the Transfers Council seems to be correspondingly very weak.
So, in terms of what are you hearing, Peter, from parents, from schools, from boards of governors about this?
So I've had a couple of conversations with principals. I've had a couple of conversations with chairs of boards of governors in various schools. Um, I think the key thing that they're waiting for is a guidance. And they I think that will be critical. I think a lot of them probably watched the assembly and watched the education minister lay out his position, which I'd have to say was very firm if anyone was watching there. I think the interesting political dynamic, Nathan, in this, if you watched that segment, was that there seems to be a couple of different camps in how this has been interpreted politically. So I think, to be fair, both ourselves and the TV, and perhaps to a lesser degree the Ulster Unionists, have all sort of said, we need to protect Christian ethos in our schools. Interestingly, the SDLP and Sinn Féin have said very little about this. In fact, during that debate, there was very little substantive or even challenging questioning towards the education minister. They, on the most part, were very quiet around it all. They asked fairly bland questions. In fact, I'm not even sure the SDLP asked a single question around it. Everything else came from the Alliance Party, and so I think that's where we stack politically on the issue. I guess going back to your original question about what are we hearing, I think the key thing will be when the guidance comes out, and I think that will. I feel confident that that will underpin boards of governors who have a Christian ethos in their school and want to continue with a Christian ethos. I think more interestingly, some of this will come down to the right of withdrawal. A lot of the judgment was focused on, and again, I haven't read the entirety of the judgment. I'm not on education anymore. I'm now chairing infrastructure, but a lot of it seemed to be on the burden placed on parents of withdrawal. And it'll be interesting to see how that's worked out, and that will probably work out at a school level. So if children want to withdraw from collective worship, or children want to withdraw from, be it RE or RSE, what happens to those children? Are they taught something else? Are they just put in a small room and given a cup of tea and a biscuit? If they have any sense, they'll not be taking a cup of tea, I would imagine, in P5. But that sort of issue, I think, will be quite interesting to watch going forward. That just what happens with those children. I think that the next step will be, chairs of boards of governors and principals will wait for the guidance. Some of which I think is going to issue towards the end of the week from the education minister's answer. But I think the substantive piece that might be a board circular probably will take a little bit more time as he considers legal guidance around it all.
Yeah. So I know that Jim, you've got to go. So I maybe throw this in as your last question, and thank you very much for your time. So Jim, you've suggested that we might see further legal challenges, and and you'd sort of mentioned there about the RSE. Now, does this case give a springboard for parents who feel likewise disenfranchised about the RSE? This was foisted on Northern Ireland in 2019. The compulsory element of this, does this give an opportunity for parental rights on RSE more
And not without legislative change, as I read it, because the right to withdraw is limited to the religious education side. RSE is about relationship and sexual education, which is part of the core curriculum now. So there is no right within Article 21 to withdraw from that. But the logical argument is, what's the reason for the right to withdraw in Article 21 on RE? Well, it's because parents disagree with what's been taught. Therefore, they don't want their child subject to that. Well, if a parent likewise disagrees with the RSE, then the logic is they should be able to withdraw from there too. But that is not the current legal position, as I perceive it. So I don't think that opens it up to that regard. That would require some legislative change, I do believe. The point about the Catholic Church is interesting because there may be some within nationalism and Catholicism thinking, well, this is the controlled sector. But if this gets out of hand in terms of challenging religious education in any sector of education, they'll be coming for us next, so to speak. So I think there might be a bit of reticence to rub their hands about this at all, and the difficulties the controlled sector's in, because it could be a springboard if it worked out as the challengers hope, eventually to also challenge the religious setting of the Catholic schools.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, you're welcome.
We really value your input, and we thank you so much, and we wish you all the very best in the rest of your evening.
Thanks. All the best.
Right. So Steve and Mark, you've been very patient. We'll start with Steve first. Steve, the minister says that Christian ethos will remain, but the court said Christian assemblies risk being coercive. Are those two positions compatible, or is there a built-in tension?
Yes, there is definitely some real tension within all of that, Nathan. I think I'd come back to the point that Jim was making. Where did these schools come from originally? They were ministries of the church in response to the Great Commission. And so children, as you would expect, through the church are being taught the Christian tenets, being taught to worship Jesus Christ, being taught that there is a God. He does exist. Jesus Christ is the Savior. Some really clear facts that are taught as objective truth by his church to the children. And the Great Commission says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, you go into all nations, baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you till the very end of the age with this task. And so the church has started schools and has run schools with acts of worship occurring every day, and with the education that's taught, not just in religious education, but all across the board, being pointed towards the fulfillment of the Great Commission, what Jesus has told his church to do. And so these schools were started by the church. And I think the question that's really at the bottom of this ruling and about our thinking about this, Nathan, is really whose schools and whose rules? Whose schools and whose rules, really? Because as a ministry of the church that they were, as has been highlighted, they were handed over in some respect to the state, and so stopped being understood as being an arm of the church and a ministry of the church where worship is, of course, going to be expected to be focused around Jesus Christ, and where the biblical worldview, where the Holy Scriptures are underpinning everything. It's moved its position to being a place where the school is understood. Whose school is it? It's understood as being, well, it's the state's school, because the state is starting to fund it. Even the buildings, the capital that they had there, the stock there was handed over to the state in some circumstances with Northern Ireland's schools. So it started to be seen more as a ministry of the state than the church, although together with the church, as has been highlighted. But the kind of Christian inclusivity that was there, of course, anybody can send their children to these schools, so long as you're going to join together with us in the worshipping of Jesus Christ and the learning about his word, because we're responding to the Great Commission, guys. This is what we're here to do. The understanding has shifted to a state school understanding of serving the state, helping pupils pass their exams and social cohesion, these kinds of aims. And we've shifted from a place of this kind of Christian inclusivity. I'd hesitate to call it Christian pluralism, but it's kind of an inclusivity of all, but under that Christian heading and Christian banner in a Christian nation, to a place where that gets watered down. And so more and more in Western society, and certainly across Europe, we understand schools as being a ministry of the state much more than of the church. Whereas in Northern Ireland, I mean, 80% of Northern Irelanders would say they're Christians. Most of the teachers are Christians. Most of those children in those classes are going to be Christians. And so to have to consider to start thinking now, what does it mean to be inspected on whether or not we're actually indoctrinating by the worship that we do, or whether or not we're indoctrinating by saying grace before snacks, which is one of the specific things that was highlighted by these parents. To have to start to say, how are we going to phrase this now? Should we be saying, well, some people believe that God created the world, rather than just saying, kids, 5-year-olds, God created the world? Do we have to start to introduce things in a very pluralistic, relativistic way through our church schools? Well, it depends on who you see owns those schools, what those schools are for, and how we understand what those schools are to be doing. So that robust defense of basing everything on the Holy Scriptures, basing it around that Article 21 is a really key issue, because otherwise the state, and a secularizing state that believes in secular humanist pluralism, will be that bases everything not on the word of God, it bases everything not on biblical foundations and biblical law, but bases things on human rights law. Then that will start to take preeminence unless we really take hold of this moment and say, no, come on, whose are these schools, and what are these schools for? And so when it comes to worship, as you were highlighting there, we need to maintain that sense of Jesus Christ being worshipped in these schools. But I'm sad to say that there is a form of indoctrination. We are teaching doctrine to children, and in fact, to say that it is possible to not be indoctrinating children is actually falsehood, because you are always teaching children something by the way in which you do something. And if you start saying, well, to all these Christian children in your class, because most of them will be, some people believe that God created the world, then you're already introducing a kind of secularist doubt to them, which is a kind of indoctrination in itself. So the way in which that is done is very, very important. And so I'm really going to be praying for Paul Given and the guidance that he produces on the basis of the good laws that are still there, so that it's really understood that the church is ministering through these schools and should continue to minister effectively to children through these schools. Have I answered your question at all, Nathan? I've kind of got on
well,
my
I think you
soapbox
have,
there.
and you've maybe went into the next section as well. But we're just going to keep. We're going to. I'm going to tell you to hold back, because neutrality stuff and all the Christian ethos stuff, that's coming soon. But I suppose the question, and I'm maybe going to ask Mark here as well. You're a teacher. You've seen this. What was the mood like as soon as this Monday morning, when everyone came in and they found this? Like there's a lot of people in your staff room wouldn't necessarily be Christian, but what was their mood like?
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. Thanks for bringing me in, because I was about to drift off for a while there. But no, it is fantastic to hear the knowledge that these guys have of the law, and of the underpinning of our Christian ethos and skills. And for me, it was it was wonderful to hear so many people give such a defense of our Christian ethos and skills in the assembly yesterday, especially the minister, the strong stance that he took, and Timothy Gaston from the TUV spoke very well as well on the issue. So I really appreciate that. Now, from from my perspective, going back on a couple of things that have been said already. One of the things that's really important to note for parents is that if your child is in a controlled school, there are transfer governors who are ministers, and they are essentially there to protect and maintain the Christian ethos of the school. So one of the things that I would be saying to parents who have children in controlled schools, get on the phone, pick up the phone and speak to those transfer governors, because they will play in a very important part in what happens down the line. But also, these schools are not run and managed by the principal of the school. They're managed by a board of governors. The principal is an employee of the school who are run by the board of governors. And at the minute, many board of governors are reconstituting. And as part of that process, they will be looking for parent governors and EA governors. So I would encourage parents, if you've got a child in a controlled school, to join the board of governors. I'm on the board of governors of my local primary school that my children go to, and I can have a say in the running of that school. And if you don't have children in a school, go onto the EA website, sign up as a governor, tell them you'd like to be a governor because they're always in need. And that way, when the guidance comes out from the Department of Education, you can step in there and be involved in how that guidance is implemented in your school. So this is not a time to sit back, lament, to think all is lost. We have to fight, and the ministers on the board of governors, parents on the board of governors, EA governors are all there to implement this guidance, and some will want to implement it in a totally different way. But if you're really concerned about this issue, get involved, get up off your backside and do something. But for me, in school, well, one of the first things that when this came out, we have a head of RE in school who is, well, she'd kill me if I told you her age, but she thought early redundancy for me. And then as we looked into it a bit more, she's kind of realized she's going to be stuck with us for another little while. But even among, and I don't know if it goes back to the Christian ethos of schools or if it's that teaching, and Steve will know this, teaching and working with young people is very much a calling. It's a very difficult job that requires a lot of sacrifice. And because of that, here in Northern Ireland, a lot of our teachers are Christians. We have a huge number of Christian teachers in Northern Ireland. And we have others who are not Christian. And when I went in the staff room, probably on Tuesday when the news had really broke, and sat down in the staff room, it was incredible to hear the number of not just Christian teachers, but non-Christian teachers who were furious over the Supreme Court's decision because they, as has been said already, felt it very much was one person dictating to everyone. And even though these these teachers are non-Christians, they can still see the value in a Christian ethos in our schools because it underpins the way that we do everything. And for me, I was thinking about this even in terms of I'm a maths teacher. I'm not an RE teacher, but when kids come to me at the start of the year, we run through rules of what way we would behave in our classroom. And the very first rule that I have in my classroom is called the golden rule. And it is that we will treat everybody in the room the way we would like to be treated ourselves, taken straight from scripture, taken straight from Jesus' words. I even copied the little byline. And that underpins the way I expect the pupils to treat each other. It underpins the way I treat them. And it underpins the way they treat me. And that is the Christian ethos that underpins our education system. It's not, we talked about this kind of non-denominational Christian background. I work in a school that has quite a large number of pupils from a Catholic background. We have pupils coming in from other countries. And we have people from a non-practicing Protestant background. And we come in and we treat each other the way that we would like to be treated because that is the Christian ethos that underpins our school. So the feeling on the ground in school was one of annoyance at what the Supreme Court has done. And I think what the analysis that Peter and Jim gave was superb. But my worry and the worry of many teachers is that this is just the start, and we have seen the blueprint for this numerous times over the last 10 years. If we look back to the abortion issue, we had the Sarah Yurt Supreme Court case. And while that didn't change the law, it led to pressure at Westminster to then change the law, or the law around RSE. We have an activist organisation in the Human Rights Commission in Northern Ireland. I anticipate that what will happen is when this guidance comes out, the Human Rights Commission will be all over it, and they will be threatening to sue the UK government, and the Secretary of State at that stage may step in and repeal the order, and try attempt to put something in place. And the other thing that we still have in Northern Ireland is our own education order, which again says that the teaching of all subjects effectively is to be done in line with the ethos and the values of the school. So they simply change RE, and I think this is one of the problems they had with RSE. They would need to change not just one tiny piece of legislation, but the whole underpinning of education in Northern Ireland. But yeah, I think I've been like Steve. It's the teacher in us. We just can't stop talking. I've gone too far. But yeah.
Politicians can't stop talking either, Mark.
Oh, well, yeah. We're all
Talk
paid
for
to talk.
Ulster. I've never
So
been as quiet. Look at this.
yeah.
You should be recording this or something, Nathan. Oh, you are.
We are.
Well, I'm just going to say, I just need to throw it in there now. Of course, the Human Rights Commission will say it's not activist. It's it's no bother. But we all know that certainly its undergirding philosophy and its approach has been it seems secular, and that has been its approach in a lot of cases, and we've seen that through many different ways. And I think you're right. I think the Human Rights Commission will be utilised here to push things forward. So I suppose maybe we'll come back to Peter. I saw you nod, and then we'll go to Steve again. So you're nodding there when Mark was saying about the whole issue of governors, the place of governors. Tell us about the place of governors in Northern Ireland. Tell us about the powers that they have, and I think it's even referred to with regards in the order about the influence governors have over religious education. And then we're going to come into Steve Beegoo, and we're going to move into the whole issue of neutrality and all the stuff there that would sort of reference there before. Just quickly, Peter.
Sure. Okay. So look, Mark makes a brilliant point. Governors are mission critical in our schools, and I'm evangelical. Hopefully evangelical about my faith, but also evangelical about boards of governors and their importance, and having good people in those, and they get reconstituted every so often. There are two types in Northern Ireland. There's Department of Education and EA, and you can actually apply to either. They have incredible power, and actually, they really do set a vision for any particular school. So I would just echo exactly what Mark said there. Really important in terms of their role. And if you think you can add value to a school, apply to be on a board of governors, and they're always looking for people. The other point I would make, and after this I will drop off the call because I suspect I'll have to put my 10-year-old to bed. I do hear noises out of my study there somewhere. So, is the importance of the 86 order, and actually the importance of having government in Northern Ireland at this time. And actually, again, Mark referenced the Executive Formation Act, and when we didn't have government, what happens in Northern Ireland? And I guess probably Jim and I would depart on this one. I think Jim would probably not have Stormont if he could. But if we don't have Stormont, then we have the NIO, and we have, and we know, they're not particularly sympathetic to some of the things that we're talking about on this call. So actually having ministers in place and having Stormont up and running, and for that matter, having a Christian education minister, who's really passionate about the Christian ethos in our schools and how that adds real values to children's lives. I mean, that is something I think even Steve, and I suspect from your accent, Steve, you're probably from England. Could you imagine having two or three ministers in the government who are Christians? But we have. So we're really lucky to have, I think, Stormont and have government and be able to make some of these decisions ourselves. And the only other thing I would say is we're also very blessed in Northern Ireland that we do have an enormous amount of Christian teachers. I mean, I think one of my kids got through primary school, and every single teacher that they got was a Christian. I know that Stranmillis, which is one of our teacher training colleges, it has the largest Christian union of any university in the entirety of the UK. So we're really, really fortunate here in many ways. But the key thing I think I want to leave this with is and Jim reflected it in his first answer. The key is the legislation here, and the fact that it's still in place. And we'll wait to see what Paul produces in terms of then the guidance. That's the next thing. And I think he made it and said it in his answer. I think he might get something out this week to boards of governors, and then a more detailed assessment later on. But again, it is what's this space for the targeting of the overall ethos, because it is very clear to me that there are people in Northern Ireland who want to secularize our schools. And I just think that would be both sad and would diminish the great value that that ethos has in education in Northern Ireland.
I think just before you go, I think that was quite interesting in the debate or the discussion around this. You could see even, you said the SDLP and Sinn Féin were rather
Very quiet.
muted. But what
Muted,
we
yeah.
did see was division in the Alliance Party, and you see, the Alliance Party on this one was quite interesting because you saw some that were aggressive and some that were sort of teetering on the line. Some
Yep.
had to clarify their view on witchcraft and
Paganism.
paganism, but which they did, just in case anyone sues us, but they did clarify it.
They did.
They couldn't clarify it when Nolan asked, but they did eventually. But it was quite interesting to see that division and that, I suppose, cognitive dissonance within the party.
Because there's lots of, as you know, Nathan, there's lots of alliance voters. I mean, I was actually there was a girl I met on Friday at a shoebox packing. We were packing shoeboxes for I think it was maybe Samaritan's Purse shoeboxes to Africa, and there was a girl who very just sort of said that she was, and she was a Christian girl. And Christians vote in different, we all vote different ways, and that's absolutely fine. We have different range of views there. So there will be lots of alliance supporters who are not on the same page as some of the particular characters we maybe saw in the assembly who have very strong views. Nuala McAllister, for example, at the tail end, very strong views about the rights of her child, and she's absolutely entitled to have those. So you're right to pick that up. I think there is not only a debate inside the Alliance Party about where they should be in this issue, but I think some of the most activist voices are the loudest. But also out there in Northern Ireland, there'll be a lot of Alliance voters who either are Christians or have very, sympathetic views, maybe cultural Christians, who actually go, "This is wrong. This is one child that, saying that, we can't have a Christian ethos on our school. That's nuts."
Yeah.
Nathan, I can probably go further than Peter here and say, if you're a Christian and you're watching this, please stop voting for the Alliance Party. It's like turkeys voting for Christmas. The Alliance Party are, they come across as this kind of central party who are, in the middle and we're all faffy and nice. They are activists to the core throughout their party, and it makes no sense for any Christian to fall for any of their kind of faffy stuff and give them any kind of vote. So I'll go further than Peter. Do not vote for the Alliance Party.
Well, I mean, look, I think I can't disagree with you. I think their worldview does not accord with the worldview of Christ, and that's the bottom line. But look, people will vote for how they feel, but I would concur. But look, Peter, I know you have to run on. I thank you for your time. I wish you all the very, very best. And look, we're going to continue this conversation with Steve and with Mark. So all the
It,
very best to you.
it was great to be here, Nathan. Anytime. And blessings, Steve. Blessings, Mark. It was really, really
Thank
interesting. So
you.
you take care, brothers.
All the best.
Guys,
All
All
the
right.
best.
All right.
Cheers, guys. Bye
bye
bye.
bye.
Well, I suppose Steve, this brings us back. This whole discussion now brings us back to what you'd raised there about neutrality. And when you read the court decision, the words that, and I raised it earlier before, but there are words called indoctrination. You say, well, look, in a sense, we're all indoctrinating, okay? But it says a word that's quite peculiar. So we have religious education needs to be taught. If you read the document, it says that it should be non-denominational, which, when the court was written, meant made it was there to ensure that um, Church of Ireland, Methodists, and Presbyterians would all be. That was the non-denomination, and now the court seems to broaden that then to sort of say about, well, it has to include all faiths and be pluralistic. It has to be critical, and it has to be objective. Now, here's the question: how, from a worldview perspective, is neutrality or objectivity possible?
No. Absolutely not. And those of your listeners who are listening to this, if there's one thing you can remember from what I say today, is that there is no neutrality. Do not be duped by the way in which it is presented as being that there is a neutral stance that can be delivered through schools. Because certainly, I know more of all sorts of different international settings. What you see is a sleepy church accepts the secular pluralism and this idea that there is a neutral, plural way of handling everything in which the church can and should flourish. Whereas that is not what you see as people start taking on board that frame of reference, and with the human rights legislation being the thing that underpins it. What you see is a continual shift that moves away from the understanding that was brought to us through the scriptures from the Bible, or that Jesus teaches, to a multiculturalism, which basically is it relativizes everything. It says, well, everything is pretty much the same. You shouldn't present anything with confidence, shouldn't really endorse anything through our state institutions, certainly not the religion of Christianity. And this is a part of the postmodern reaction that we have, where anything that has any sniff of authority about it. This is where the RSE stuff comes in. You know, this idea that there could be doctors that know whether you're male or female, or even a God that has designed you chosen for you to be male or female. Even that kind of level of authority should be pushed back against because it's trying to oppress you. What is put in its place is, well, let's just consider that everybody can find their own truth, and that what is true for them is true for them. And this is a form. This is why pluralism is being embraced, because it's a worldview, it's a way of thinking that moves God out of the picture. So it is not neutral at all. It is a deliberate removing of the authoritative foundational principles on which Western society has been successfully built, with family institutions, with school institutions that have honored Jesus Christ and his word in the Bible at the center. So there is a certain allure to it because it feels like, oh, it's being so nice to everybody, but it is a worldview which is being indoctrinated to our children. It's a certain doctrine associated with it, which is being pushed upon children. And so teaching this kind of doubt to small children as well through the way in which the education is presented leads to a huge insecurity, and leads to the kind of mental health issues which are rife within our nations. And so it's not a neutral thing. Has no neutral telos to it. That the end points of all of this are very bad for children and young people when they're not given the truth that comes through Jesus Christ. So absolutely not. There is no neutrality.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm gonna. I see you nodding as well. it's interesting. As somebody with classroom experience, I know Steve has a lot of classroom experience and also at the head.
Steve is a principal more recently, so no, he doesn't have a lot of classroom experience. It's
Touche.
me. It's me that's
It's
at the
you.
chalk
It's okay.
case.
Well, we'll come to before you, the great guru. So, Mark, with somebody with classroom experience, how would, following on from what Steve's actually saying there, how would a teacher actually deliver neutral RE or neutral worship, and what does that look like in practice?
I think Steve's answered it perfectly. It's impossible, because Jesus said, "You're either for me or you're against me." So it is impossible to be neutral. And Steve has hit on so many things that I was thinking about before tonight. Even the idea that you could say to a child, some people believe that God created the world. Well, that in itself is an anti-God statement. Because as Christians, we believe in objective truth. We believe that there is truth and there is a lie. And for us to say, well, this is just a belief that some people have, is a lie. And as Christians, we should not abide by that. And you know, Steve was speaking there about this myth of neutrality that hasn't just permeated society, it's permeated our church, and our churches are bound by this myth of neutrality. And for too long, our churches have had this view that if we simply go and worship in our church, if we keep our head down, if we don't say anything that's going to annoy anybody, then they'll leave us alone. And all of a sudden, we're being asked to say, Caesar is Lord. So that the secular world is not going to leave you alone. And I know Steve will know, with Christian Concern, there are street preachers up and down the UK every weekend, every day being arrested for simply reading the words that are contained in the Bible. And that's the standard that we have got to in our nation. And when Jim earlier was saying that he was disappointed that, with the response of the Transferers Council, I was disappointed too, but not surprised. All the loudest voices on this issue have been those of politicians. The quiet voices have been the voice of the church. And Steve said earlier that part of the Great Commission, and I think it's part of the Great Commission that's very often overlooked, is that Christ said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And because of that, we are to go out and make disciples of the nations. And the big question I think that we have to ask in terms of the way we school our children, the way we run our country, the way we run our churches, is who's in charge here? And we in the West have fallen into this kind of delusion where we're not sure who's in charge. Our whole country is founded on the principle that Christ is king. He is the sovereign one. But yet we are now saying, you can't say that anymore. That's the foundation of our whole country, our whole democracy, our laws. And all of a sudden we're being told, no, you can't say that anymore. And I think when you look at the state, not just of Northern Ireland, but of Britain as a whole, of Ireland, when you look further west, it's clear now that the West is under God's judgment. And I was looking earlier in the week at indications from the Bible of how you know that a country is under the judgment of God. And the first thing is morality is absent. Anything goes. Secondly, there was a nation divided. Look at last summer. Look at the divisions that we're seeing in our society over immigration, over Israel, over how we should handle the budget, the riots on our streets. When you look to America, has America ever been more divided than it is now? Where you have agents rounding up illegal immigrants and American citizens protesting in the streets, and the polarization that we see in society is huge. The lack of resources, we're coming into a budget where everybody's braced for being hit hard in a budget because we're told there's this black hole of resources. The vulnerable and the innocent become prey. We have a situation here in Northern Ireland where tens of thousands of children have been murdered through abortion. In England, you're talking 250,000 children every single year. And not only and that's not enough, we're now moving to a situation where the old are becoming prey for the state through the Assisted Dying Act. And we have pastors and ministers teaching false gospels. You look at the state of the Church of England, the state of many of the churches here, the rise of this idea of progressive Christianity, which is just completely false. And last of all, this idea that, life is all about me. It's all about what I can get out of it, and that pride of self. And the solution to this, with all respect to Jim and Peter, the solution to this issue is not a political one. It's not a matter of the head, it's a matter of the heart. And what is required here is for the church as a whole, and I'm not talking about a denomination, I'm talking about those who believe in Christ, to repent of their sin, to repent of their apathy, and then start to share the gospel like we were commanded in the Great Commission, to start to say, no, this is the truth. This is not just what I believe, this is what is true. And to win this nation back for Christ. And we know, we've read the end of the book. We know that in the end, Christ wins. But we are responsible for now. We are responsible for carrying out that Great Commission during our lifetime. And for me as a teacher, that Great Commission, I've sat with pupils in the past talking about their GCSE maths and talking about, I know pupils who are going through a hard time and they're not performing. And I've sat and said to them, listen, you want to sort out your head, the first thing you have to sort out is your heart. And I've shared the gospel with them. I've had pupils who have, we have a bunch of Christian teachers in school, and we've seen pupils who are struggling to do coursework because they haven't got a computer at home. So we've pitched in together and we've brought them a laptop and we've shared the gospel with them. And that opportunity to have that impact on young people is something that I don't think will change with the law, because the law may say it's not allowed, but Christ is king, not the state. And I will continue to do it, no matter what the consequences may be for me. And I hope and I pray that our Christian Board of Governors and our Christian ministers on the Board of Governors will continue to uphold the Christian ethos in our schools, even if the state says they can't. Because ultimately we must obey God rather than men.
Yeah. No, that I think a lot of the things that we have, I think a lot of the things you've said, their mark is certainly on my heart, on the heart of this podcast. I know it's the same with the heart of Christian concern. We really believe fundamentally that God's word has an application to all areas of life. There's no hidden doorways. There's no hidden rooms where God is not sovereign over all. In our heart, but not just our heart, in our families, in our churches, in our nations, and in the world. And I think that that's something that can be lost. It's funny, Steve. I suppose for some, and I know we're going to wrap up here because I appreciate that time is we said we keep this to an hour. So just in closing, then, Steve, there are going to be parents out there who look at this and say, well, that we want to do something different. We want to do homeschooling. we want to do maybe independent Christian education. There's many of us out there who've sort of come to that conclusion that that makes things easier. There's people like Mark who are in the state sector and being missionaries in there. And remember that the ethos is still officially and legally Christian. So we can understand. But what would you say to those people who are thinking of maybe going down a more independent route? And also, I'll give you an opportunity at that point then to tell us about some interesting event you have in April. So
That's brilliant. Thank you, Nathan. Well, in the spirit of advertising each other's things, I would definitely recommend people watch your episode 29 that you did with Simon and Jessica Turpin, which was absolutely excellent, where they explained from a parent's perspective some of the things that they'd been praying through and wrestling through. So I won't go through all of that, but I really encourage you, if you're interested in listening, go back to what Nathan did with Simon and Jessica Turpin. I think it's really important for each parent, each set of parents to go to the Lord and to be praying and saying, Lord, what is it you want us to do with my children? No, no, no. What is it you want us to do with your children? Because whose are they? They are the Lord's, and you've been given them to steward over a certain period of time. And if he is saying to you, send them to the local state school, then you must do that. If he's saying homeschool them, you need to do that. If he's saying send them to an independent school where you've got to pay fees or do something different, then you need to do what it is that's right for your children. No, what's right for his children. And it's not the same. It depends on your family circumstances, depends where you live, it depends on the kind of schools that you've got around you. There will be different things that you need to hear. If you're going to get involved in the state system, make sure you become a governor like Mark challenged. Get properly involved in that school community, because I really believe that the Lord wants salt and light in education, as he spoke to us. And what is salt? Salt are those small grains that sprinkled out that change the flavour, or in biblical times, the small things that were sprinkled out and were used as fertilizer for the soil even. So it brings flavour and it preserves what's already good there within the substance that it gets sprinkled into, or it brings the ability for it to have life. So you need to be, if you're a teacher, as I was for 17 years within the state system, you can be that kind of salt, so long as you don't lose your saltiness, which means keeping that strong sense of, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, I'm doing what he wants me to be doing, not being allured by this pluralist way of thinking or this postmodern way of thinking, keeping sharp, keeping faithful to the gospel in the work that you're doing, as Mark was beautifully describing about how he was praying with that math student. So we need that salt in the system, and we also need light. We need bright, shiny, intense places where every subject is thoroughly infused with Christian worldview, like the kind of things that Simon and Jessica were talking about that they were doing with their children, that can actually shine a light. What does light do is it exposes what's going on elsewhere. It exposes the underperformance. It exposes the darkness which is there. And so club together with others, create new things. We've got Education Revolution event coming up next April here in London, April the 25th, Saturday, April the 25th in London at Westminster Chapel. Great venue. And we'll be gathering loads of Christians across the education sphere who want to be great salt, great light, many telling the stories of the amazing things that they're seeing in their schools. Christian unions bulging at the seams in state schools. So many hungry young people saying, what is there in life if there's not a God? And finding the answers through talking to their friends and colleagues, with Christian teachers who are getting active within their schools. And we're seeing people start. I'm working with 30 different groups across the whole of the United Kingdom who want to start new schools or new learning centres. That's like home education groups that work together. And we're supporting those groups. We've just been visiting a couple just recently who've recently started. So there's all sorts of great stuff happening. Come to our events. Do sign up to Christian Concern newsletters to find out about all the different areas that we're involved in, not only involved in education, but involved in pushing back against the assisted suicide bill, issues around abortion, supporting the street preachers, all those things that have come up during your podcast. So please do connect with us, and if you can possibly make it across the sea, or if you're in England already, come over to the Education Revolution conference in April 2025, April the 25th, 2026. Thank you, Nathan. Advert over.
Thank you. Well, absolutely. I must say, I did go to the conference in Birmingham, or sorry, Tamworth, with the Mission for God one. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make the one in London, but we'll do our best if we can.
Great.
But certainly would encourage people, if they are free, available, and to attend that. I suppose just finishing off, one sentence each. What should parents do right now in response to this ruling? Steve, yourself, what should parents do right now in response to this ruling in one sentence?
Come to the Lord in prayer and say, what is it, Lord, that you're calling us to do with your children and for the sake of this nation?
Brilliant. And Mark, yourself?
I'm going to do a follow-on sentence and then do it. Uh, so then listen and do it. And whatever it is that you're told to do it. And if that may simply be the Great Commission, do it. So for far too long, we've had people who are sitting on the sidelines, who are happy to just go to church on a Sunday and that's it. It's time to get active. It's time to get involved.
Brilliant. Well, folks, you've heard Jim Allister, you've heard Peter Martin, you've heard Stephen Beegoo, you've heard Mark Lambe, and this ruling raises serious contradictions and uncertainties, but also highlights the opportunities that there are for us to be salt, to be light, to rethink the future in education in Northern Ireland. Thank you to each one of our guests, and thank you to you for watching. But until next time, keep advancing Christ's kingdom in every domain and moving forward with truth. Thank you.